Yeah, so learning something that you have no idea how to do is totally possible, otherwise known as learning something brand new, a brand new subject of knowledge, whether it's pursuing new type of art form, learning an instrument, painting, whatever else, learning a new language. There are lots of different things that you can, lots of different skills that you can pick up that you had no idea how to do beforehand, were completely clueless about. There was a time when every single one of us was clueless about everything. That is just kind of the natural progression of the human mind. As you grow up, you pick an interest and then you learn how to do it. So yes, it is absolutely possible to learn something that you have no idea how to do. And I know it's possible because there are two recent examples of it in my life. I'm just going to tell you the story of one of them for now, but those two examples are 3D modeling and animation. 2D animation to be a bit more specific, but animation in general. So animation as an art form is something that I've always admired. When I was a kid, especially, I grew up watching animated skits on YouTube, and I just thought animation was the bees of the knees. I thought it was super cool, and I always wished I knew how to do it. But I didn't, and it looked really intimidating to me for the longest time, because I knew that animation took a long time to do. I knew that it was immensely tedious, and those two things alone really scared me into not even trying to learn it. Wasn't until 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020, when I suddenly found myself with a bunch of free time on my hands. What a coincidence! Who could have imagined that? And so I decided that, well, since we're stuck here in our homes, and we have nothing better to do, and we have no idea when we'll be allowed to return to a normal life, I may as well take the time to learn something that is incredibly tedious and remarkably challenging. In other words, animation. I use the time that I spent cooped up inside this house during 2020 to learn animation skills. And fortunately, we live in a time where you can pretty much learn any art form you want on the internet. There is a tutorial for basically anything on YouTube. Not even exaggerating when I say that. So, needless to say, it was pretty easy for me to find a handful of animation tutorials. And what I discovered pretty quickly that surprised me is that there are two primary different types of 2D animation. I had always assumed that there was just one type of 2D animation, and it is the typical drawing frame by frame. I don't actually know what the technical term for that is, but it's basically where you draw an individual picture one at a time, and then you play them back at a high speed to get motion, or rather get the illusion of motion with the pictures that you drew. The other form of animation does have a technical name, again, that I know of, and that technical name is tweening, where you're using keyframes, which are a much newer invention in media arts than animation in general, because animation actually predates film, in case you didn't know that, with things like flipbooks and stuff. Tweening uses keyframes, which is basically telling the computer to move a particular object or text or item or whatever else from one point of the screen to the other. And it can do that both in terms of zoom, motion, like directional motion, as well as rotating. Kind of difficult to explain without physically showing you on my computer here. But the point is, you can animate using keyframes. And animating using keyframes is known as tweening. So in other words, instead of drawing your animation frame by frame or picture by picture, you instead draw a character in pieces. You draw the head individually, the torso individually, or on separate layers, in a matter of fact. 'Cause you draw your character in separate layers in any kind of drawing software. So you draw the head as a separate layer, the torso as a separate layer, the upper legs and lower legs as a separate layer, upper arms and lower arms as a separate layer. And then you export each of those individual layers individually as PNG files, and then you reassemble your character in whatever editing software it is that you use, and then you use keyframes to move all the individual parts. It's definitely more complex, but for somebody like me who really isn't any good at drawing, it is extremely beneficial, because now I'm able to make animations despite the fact that I'm very inconsistent at drawing. Although one of my personal goals is to get better at that, but that is a topic for a different video. And yeah, that is how I learned animation. I learned animation arguably the more complicated way, but I did still learn it in any case. I do remember that the first couple of animations I made, sort of as practice, after first watching these tutorials I'd found on YouTube, they were not good, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. When you're brand new to something and you're learning it for the first time, you are always going to be bad at it, unless you are some kind of miracle or god, even. You aren't. Your very first attempt at something is always going to be rubbish. I think it was Ernest Hemingway who had the famous quote of "the first draft of everything is sh-." That is such an unbelievably true statement, and anybody who's ever tried to learn anything new knows exactly how true that is. But even though those first animations of mine weren't very good, they were still my first animations, and I still made them. I had made something animated, which for me was a huge deal. Because remember, I had been terrified to even try to do this. It intimidated the heck out of me to the point where I didn't even want to try to learn it, because I just automatically assumed that I wouldn't be able to do it. And I'm still dealing with that. I'm still dealing with cases where I've still convinced myself that I am incapable of doing it. A very good and very recent example of this is learning proper 2D animation. 2D animation where you draw individual frames, picture by picture. It is still something I really want to learn. I really want to learn how to animate that way. Ever since I got used to tweening, and I fully understood how that worked, I had set my sights on wanting to learn proper 2D animation, but again, I just convinced myself that it would be too tedious, that it would be too difficult, and that I wouldn't be able to do it because of whatever reasons. It takes too much time, I'm not a good enough drawer, and about a month ago, I decided to just put my foot down and try to learn it. And I was going to make a video series on me learning it. But immediately after I started, I ran into a pretty significant problem, which, even though it was something that I had always said in the back of my mind about animation, part of me never really wanted to believe it, which is, I really am not good at drawing. I'm not. And I know that there are some folks in the animation space who say that you don't have to be good at drawing to be able to animate. And maybe that's true, but I mean, when I say I'm not good at drawing, I mean that my proportions were so inconsistently inconsistent. They were always incorrect, no matter what I did. It also did not help that my only option was to draw using a mouse and keyboard, which everybody knows that you aren't supposed to do that, but that's the only option I had available, and I wasn't going to back down that easily. But in any case, I do think I need to spend time getting better at drawing, learning proper drawing techniques, not just winging it like I used to do as a kid. I never properly learned how to draw. Yes, my dad, who was an artist for the longest time, he did show me a couple of techniques, but I mean, that's really it. So that is why that video series stopped immediately after I started it. Is because I realized, oh, I don't actually possess the skills to do this yet. And you know what? That's okay. That is okay, because even though I don't have the skills to do that, as of now, I can learn those skills. We have access Learning something new has never been easier. With the amount of information that's available online, and the amount of tutorials, quality tutorials, that people are putting out on how to do specific things creatively, it has never been easier to learn a new skill. So yes, you absolutely can learn something you have no idea how to do, and I'm not just saying this for your sake. I'm also saying it for mine. Because as soon as I realized that I wasn't that good at drawing, I just sort of wrote off learning 2D animation as a whole. I immediately threw in the towel. I was like, well, and then I can't do it, I guess. That's the end of the road. I'll just revert back to knowing what I know how to do. And I'm not proud of that. But I guess it's perfectly natural to be scared. Perfectly natural to fear judgment, to doubt yourself, to not think you have what it takes. But I also felt the same way about animation in general. And here I am now, comfortably making 2D animations, even if the technique is a bit unusual. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if there's something that you want to learn, but you have no idea how to do it, you can do it. You can. The resources are out there, you have the ability. It just takes time. And patience. So, just be patient with yourself.